Okay, so I think we can start. Is the sound okay, Arvin? Right. Excellent. So, uh, good morning, good afternoon if you're on our time zone, and good evening, and welcome to our first briefing of the year. A happy New Year to all of you. As you can see, there are many of us today. It's a special occasion. Today we will focus on digital policy predictions. For those of you who have been following our work long enough, you will recall that in the previous year, our founding director of DiploFoundation, Dr. Jovan Purpalia, who used to carry out the crystal ball exercise every January. This year, as many of you know, Jovan is serving as the executive chair of the UN High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation. So instead of Johan, we're following on his footsteps and sharing what we think are the digital policy predictions for 2019. As we go through the predictions, you will notice that we will also share updates from the main developments in January. There were quite a few important ones. So in that sense, today's briefing is unique. That's why I have just called it a special occasion. I have the pleasure of being in the company of my colleagues from Diplo and the GIP, and together we will present these 10 predictions. So it's my pleasure to introduce Vladimir Radunovic, Marilia Maciel, whom we don't see yet, but she's with us also, Arvin Kamberi, Katarina Hunna, you've just seen her, Kata will also be with us, and Sorina Terreno. We also have Marco Lotti, who's facilitating the online discussion. You'll see him as Marco Online Moderator. And Adriana Gavrilovic, who will take us through the regional developments as usual towards the end of this briefing. As usual, please feel free to ask questions. We'll take the questions and comments, of course. We'll take them after we've gone through the predictions. Nigel, thank you for the compliments. And so I propose that we start. So the first prediction is on data governance. I'll just move the slide. So data governance. Our prediction is that the discussions in 2019 will mature, but there will also be tensions. So we've heard it so many times by now that the data is the oil of the 21st century. We've seen it in blog posts, we've seen it everywhere. Not only is data a very important resource, but it is also a very valuable one. And of course, this value will continue to increase. So far, the debates on cross-border data flows have been quite contentious. I would probably oversimplify, but in brief, we have a number of countries in favor of the free flow of data without borders, and we have other countries that are staunchly in favor of data localization rules, and there are a few overlaps. Now, as the data value increases, we anticipate, obviously, that the discussions will also intensify. Why? It's not only because of these issues that have been going on for some time now, but it is also because there are other considerations in the mix. The developments in AI, for instance, and we have been saying this in the past months, the developments in AI are transforming the business models of the companies, and they are making these models more complex. So in 2019, how should policymakers deal with this? We will also see security and privacy issues, security incidents, for instance, data breaches. They're on the rise. We've seen in 2018 the number of data breaches have increased over the data breaches that we saw in 2017 and so on. So it's always on the rise. So again, how should the policymakers respond to the security and these privacy issues? And as you'll see further on during this briefing, my colleagues will refer to some of these issues in the predictions that they will present, because we will see that the data governance issues are in reality quite cross-cutting. But a new development is that this year the data policies will find a new forum for discussion. Why? I think Marilia will tell us more about this, but I can briefly say that a few weeks ago, a number of countries agreed to start the WTO negotiations on e-commerce, just over 70 countries. And we also saw that at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the Prime Minister of Japan has said that he will push data governance under WTO, closely linked, during the G20 meeting in June. So we can definitely expect a lot of developments when it comes to data governance. And that's our first prediction for 2019. I'll give the floor to Vlada to take us through, so it's Vlada, Sorina, and Vlada to take us through the predictions related to security and AI, but they will tell us more. Over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'll move to the next slide. The geopolitics, we usually start with geopolitics, but data this time seemed to be quite in the focus. When it comes to geopolitics, of course, the main tensions that we have beyond cyberspace, which is somewhere in the triangle, if we may put it, of the US, China, and Russia, will remain reflected in cyberspace as well. And that particularly relates to the trends in cyber attacks and cyber armament. On one hand, we see the increase of the offensive or investments in offensive capabilities. The US, UK, France have been more and more open on what sort of investments they are going to put in cyber capabilities, mainly related to defense sector. But as we know, the capabilities of cyber defense capabilities in most cases actually also have these components of offensive capabilities, so it's closely related. Mapping that we do within the Digital Watch, and we update it always, now shows that we have 23 countries which openly say within their policies that they have offensive cyber capabilities, and we have about 24, 25 countries which most certainly also have offensive cyber capabilities. There are many countries which we didn't manage to map because they're not open enough. So we can expect in the year to come to have more countries which are actually investing in offensive cyber capabilities. Now we say to some extent that there could be good bits in that. One is that more and more countries, and particularly the Western countries, are open about their investments. So we see a bit more of, probably not transparency, but as we like to say, translucency, that we see there is some sort of investment. We know what's happening, at least that could help the dialogue. When it comes to the international dialogue, we've seen at the end of the 2018 the two new initiatives within the UN, the continuation of the group of governmental experts, and then the new open-ended working group, both of them working on the same mandate to further develop the norms and discuss the implementation of the international law in cyberspace. Yet, most likely, this international geopolitical rift between the main parties will block any sort of clear progress, at least for the time being. But what we can see, or what we can predict probably, is that what we call often track 2 and track 1.5 dialogue, which means less formal dialogue between countries, but involving still governmental representatives in some more informal setting, as well as other stakeholders, could possibly help bridging the gap. And when we talk about that, we mentioned the work of the Global Commission on Cyberspace, on stability of cyberspace, the Paris Call, which was launched and will be revisited at the IGF at the end of this year, the Geneva dialogue, which was run by the Swiss government, and similar initiatives which could help the dialogue. And then finally, when it comes to the crossfire, basically, between the main parties, the bad news is that we'll most likely continue seeing even more open conflicts, more attacks, subversions, intrusions, everything under the threshold of the armed attack. Yet, what we might see is now, because more and more of them will actually go or follow the European and the US approach to attribute the attacks openly, since we see most of the attribution happening without a clear methodology and transparency in the evidences. What we might see coming would be increased dialogue and cooperation on establishing some forms of transparent methodologies, common methodologies for attribution, even if completely unofficial and in the nascent phase. I'll close it there and then pass it on to Sorina.
Thank you, Vlada. Hello, everyone. Let me also move the slides. So, talking about artificial intelligence, our crystal ball is saying that it will become more mainstream, but I guess that's pretty much predictable for everyone. Last year we saw a lot of focus on artificial intelligence, and it was one of the topics that we covered most of the times in our briefings throughout last year. We saw governments putting together national plans and strategies. We saw intergovernmental organizations looking into related policy issues like the future of work, and of course a lot of technological developments throughout the year. And I guess one example is IBM's Project Debater, which is an artificial intelligence system which can engage in real arguments with human on more or less complex topics, so the progress there is pretty obvious. But then there is also a question, how much in all this discussion about AI is reality and how much is hype? Because what we also saw last year were a lot of, I would call them imagination exercises, in which we were envisioning the advent of singularity, a society in which artificial intelligence is actually fully matching human intelligence. Whether we will be getting there anytime soon, I guess that remains a matter of debate, including among scientists and people actually working on developing artificial intelligence. So beyond this hype, yes?
Sorry to interrupt you. There are problems with hearing.
Okay, so it's too loud. Let me try to fix that. Maybe this will help. Is better? Okay, thank you. So removing my headset and going back to artificial intelligence. Beyond the hype and these imagination exercises, artificial intelligence is actually already part of our life, and we see it basically everywhere, from powering online searches to being part of retail platforms influencing our purchases, and more recently supporting voice recognition software, which is a source of debate itself. And the results of this big debate on disruptions on the work and the jobs environment. In all this complicated context, policymakers and businesses do need to better understand what artificial intelligence actually is and navigate between hype and reality, because at the end of the day it is on them to take action and address the challenges that come with artificial intelligence. And our predictions for this year is that the future of work will remain an important element and a topic for debate, especially as automation increases. And we saw last year a lot of researches and studies saying, for example, that as much as 14% of the global workforce will have to change jobs and acquire new skills due to the disruption caused by automation. So there needs to be more focus on adapting the educational curricula and reskilling and upskilling workers to actually be able to find jobs in this new world of work. There is a recent report from the International Labour Organization, the Global Commission on the Future of Work, and there are some recommendations and suggestions there on a human-centered agenda for a decent future of work. The question that will probably be in focus this year is about who should take the lead on dealing with such challenges. Is it the governments or is it the private sector? I think we don't yet have an answer for that, and we'll probably see a lot of debate around this. Beyond the future of work, there will also continue to be increased discussions on issues related to security, privacy, and ethics in the context of artificial intelligence development. And probably one specific area that will see most of these debates is related to autonomous cars. Some of the companies are already having plans on testing fully autonomous cars on public roads. For example, Waymo and General Motors. Tesla is even more ambitious, planning to launch this kind of cars ahead of anyone else. But with these technical developments, we also have questions about security and safety issues. And in the context of autonomous cars, that's pretty obvious. How are we making sure that decisions taken by an autonomous system is actually more human-centered than everything else? So the debates there will continue as well, including within governments. The legal and ethical questions, we saw a lot of them last year, like how will we ensure that artificial intelligence systems are human-centric? Who will actually ensure this? And how about the liability of autonomous systems? And whether they should be empowered or entrusted in kind of legal entity. And we saw a lot of debate around this, and we expect this debate to continue. What we should be keeping an eye on probably are a couple of high-level groups established in the context of several organizations. The European Union has a high-level expert group on AI. The Council of Europe has a similar committee working on human rights dimensions of automated data processing and different forms of artificial intelligence. There is also the discussion on lethal autonomous weapons continuing this year. And maybe last but not least, there was this announcement or proposal made by President Macron, the French President Macron, at the IGF last year, talking about the plans to create some sort of an international panel for artificial intelligence as an international body to deal with concerns around these developments. And we will see if this will happen this year. And that would be something for us to definitely keep an eye on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarina, for that roundup on AI, automation, future of work, autonomous cars, you named it all. Vlad, over to you. I think there was a question, if you would like to take it now. I see that you have responded. I don't know if you would like to add anything, but over to you for the next prediction.
Thank you, Steph. The question was basically whether the impression is that at the moment we see the biggest tensions in the cyber negotiations ever thus far, or this rift. And my take is that it's actually the reflection of the more general relations on a global level and geopolitical relations. And we've seen a couple of years ago that the UNGD did have, or the negotiations did have, more success even within the Organization of European, the OSCE security. That there was a dialogue, as at the moment when the tensions rose on the global level, we saw this dialogue halt. But I'm positive that if the global tensions decrease, that we can see improvements here. Till then, the informal dialogue will definitely help. Moving into somewhat less political aspects of cybersecurity, unfortunately, since I'm in charge of the cybersecurity, you can't expect me to bring many of the good news or good predictions, and that's really unfortunate. When it comes to the breaches, we've seen so many hacks and breaches into the private sector databases. Marriott was definitely the hotspot, and the Facebook breach were the hotspots of the last year, unfortunately. And I'm afraid that in 2019 we're going to continue seeing that. We'll see new breaches. We'll see innovative threat landscape, particularly involving some components of the artificial intelligence, or learning, if you wish, machine learning, some components or more components of targeting the Internet of Things and smart devices which are not protected enough. But at the same time, I'm positive that we will see more sort of defense approaches and solutions and innovations in that as well. Not only the solutions, but also probably a more serious approach of the companies. We see the increased number of companies joining the initiatives by Microsoft, Siemens, and so on. There is some sort of awareness raising in the companies. They have to be around the table and discuss security. I mentioned smart devices, new gadgets. The threats will definitely be increasing towards the connected devices, and we can hope for greater involvement of the producers of non-IT technology, traditionally, like the car producers or the health industry, which are getting into the IT and the connected devices, to be more aware and join the fora and the processes like the Charter of Trust, which focuses particularly on the vendor side, and then the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which discusses a lot the standards. So that's rather hope than the prediction, but I think we can also be positive that this will increase this year. When it comes to innovations, insurance is definitely, cyber insurance is something that's popping up as one of the innovations in sort of defense. We see more and more offers and models or schemes for cyber insurance, particularly for big business and with some sort of a limited insurance, but still it is something because it will drive greater implementation of security standards in the private sector. It might not be enough, of course, because the insurance is still limited. So we can see, or we will most likely see, as in other fields of digital policy, greater involvement of governments in terms of regulation, harder regulation of security standards. And we can hope that this will be followed with the governmental policies, particularly on national levels, to support the private sector and particularly micro and small and medium enterprises in increasing the standards. When it comes to cybercrime, we're still missing addressing the weaknesses of the law enforcement, the resources, the slow cooperation, and we haven't seen any sort of ideas for improvement of the cooperation across the law enforcement agencies across the countries. Council of Europe has been doing a lot of work related to the Budapest Convention, particularly in capacity building, and this will increase, most certainly. That's a good news. And we have seen the new Russian resolution on combating cybercrime at the UN. While on one hand, it is sort of a competition to the Council of Europe efforts, it might also boost dialogue further on the political level on combating cybercrime, so it could be positive. Last bit is on surveillance, and we are seeing more and more technologies which are being implemented in surveillance. We've seen a lot of attempts at the end of the year, and the positions of the security agencies, and particularly the Five Eyes countries, well, they were quite clear in their meeting in August that they don't want to weaken encryption, but they will proactively search for solution for law enforcement agencies to be able to access data that they need. And they announced they'll be doing that in dialogue with tech companies. So we can hope there'll be enhanced dialogue in this regards. And Australia has brought the new law, which basically pushes back on the encryption. So while further tensions will exist between trying to access the data lawfully by the law enforcement agencies and then fighting that back for human rights and privacy, I'm not that positive that we'll still see the constructive dialogue. Probably we'll have to wait for 2020 and afterwards to get into a constructive phase. And finally, the facial recognition, which has come to a level of high precision and implementation increasingly around schools, airports, by law enforcement agencies, tech companies as well. And then we are seeing a strong pushback when it comes to concerns, inaccuracy, privacy, the bias, and so on. We saw private sector, actually, Microsoft calling for greater regulation on facial recognition, so we can see more of the governmental stepping in. But similarly to the encryption technology, I'm afraid we are not going to see constructive dialogue this year, but rather still a bit of tensions and leading towards more constructive dialogue in the next years. Steph, back to you.
Thank you, Vlada, for the roundup on more specific on cybersecurity and surveillance and some of the new technologies. With regards to new technologies, Arvin will take us through some of them later on. But let's continue our predictions. And the fifth one, as you're seeing on the slide, is about privacy. So privacy rules will leave their punitive mark. And we have already started seeing this actually with a development in January. The French, the CNIL, National Commission on Informatics and Liberty, it imposed quite a hefty fine on Google. I'm not sure Google sees it as a hefty fine. But anyway, the 50 million euro financial penalty was imposed by the regulator for Google not obtaining valid user consent for personalizing the adverts. Obviously, a lot of the issues surrounding the GDPR will be fought in the court. So we'll see. We're expecting to see quite a lot of that. I would say it will be the year of the implementation, although it started last year in May, but it will definitely increase. It will be probably the year of the implementation of the GDPR. And also the e-privacy new rules are also coming up at EU level. But looking back at 2018, all of us will surely remember, it's still fresh in our minds, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where well, it's also Facebook scandal, where the company was able to obtain the data of 50 million users, and from those 50 million users, it managed to construct the personality profiles of 30 million users and sell that data to the politicians. Now, there are tough issues ahead, and I will outline at least two. So there are more. The first is that although we've seen one major company involved in the scandal, in reality, there are other companies which may already have that private data. And once it's out, it's out. So the data that is already out there could still be relevant. It is still valuable data. So what do we do with that? The second is that with all this data around, with so many breaches that have already happened, we can expect more breaches to continue. I think it is a fair expectation. Unfortunate one, but that's the trend, unfortunately. And this goes back to the first prediction and to the security implications, which Vlada has just spoken about. So it's all quite connected. And I would say it's connected also to our next prediction. And so I will give the floor to Marilia.
Thank you very much, Steph. Our next prediction is about the regulation of tech companies. As we saw in 2018, 7 of the 10 most valuable companies given by market capitalization come from the digital industry. And we have 2 tech companies that achieved the mark of $1 trillion in value. And this has really called the attention of the eyeballs of the regulators in different fields. Of course, privacy has been at the forefront because of the approval of the General Data Protection of Regulation and the entry into force of this regulation. But there are other areas in which governments are moving forward with regulation too. Taxation is one of them. There has not been a common view on taxation in the European Union, but there are talks on these regards, and some countries have started to move forward unilaterally in trying to enact tax laws that will fight the fact that many tech companies put their headquarters into places that allow them to pay less tax. So this is a big concern for governments. Another concern Vlada already mentioned, which is the breaching of data. And these companies, they accumulate a large amount of data. It is the core of their business models. But of course, this data is very prone to being stolen or leaked. And this is something that the governments are concerned about. And privacy is another field as well. So governments are more and more moving forward and recognizing the need for regulation, but not only governments. The private sector itself has recognized that self-regulation has some limitations, especially in some particular fields, such as cybersecurity. There needs to be a moving forward with governmental regulation. Microsoft as well called for regulation on face recognition technologies. So probably in the next year, in this year, we will see more and more call for regulation. The French government as well during the IGF has moved forward in calling for more regulation. So this is something that probably will pick up in 2019, coming from different sectors and in different areas as well. We saw this in the World Economic Forum. Different governments have recognized as well that regulation will be needed, such as Germany, but not only developed countries. South Africa has recognized that too. So we can expect more regulation in 2019 over companies that are part of the tech sector. Another area which is connected to the digital economy and with regulation is the regulation of e-commerce. We have seen that for some years now, governments are trying to achieve some common view in the World Trade Organization on how to regulate e-commerce. E-commerce is expected to achieve in this year the figure of $1 trillion in value, so it's more and more important for the digital economy and for the economy, for the global economy as a whole. And several countries are trying to achieve regulation multilaterally at the World Trade Organization. There's a group of more than 70 countries that are pushing forward, that have created a group, and this group is discussing which areas should be regulated first. There are talks on lowering taxation. There are talks on approving rules that will make digital electronic signatures easier. But one of the points that are more controversial is, of course, the free flow of data. There are countries that have different views on that, and we can see nuance of different positions on the table at the WTO. There are countries that are very open to free flow of data with very low regulation. This is the case of the United States and Japan. There are countries that have a more careful approach, especially when it comes to protecting privacy, which is the case of the European Union. So free flow of data is something that the European Union wants to see, but they also need to make sure that this will respect the privacy of citizens. And we have countries that are pretty much looking forward to have rules on e-commerce that will make e-commerce grow, such as China. E-commerce now, it's a very important part of the Chinese economy, but that have second views on the free flow of data, because China still has rules on data localization, for example, and they want to make sure that the free flow of data can be compatible with the preservation of the national space that countries have to enact a public policy. This is the position of many developing countries as well, countries that have been very vocal to make sure that these new rules and the free flow of data will not undermine the capacity of countries, developing countries, to grow and to take benefit from the digital economy, are South Africa, India, which have been very vocal at the WTO. But while the talks in the WTO don't move forward, we see on the other hand that there are regional trade agreements that have moved forward with a greater speed. We saw, for instance, that the agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico has been finally approved, substituting the agreement that existed before, the NAFTA agreement. So the new NAFTA is already into place. Asian countries have a plurality of different agreements that have been approved or are on the verge of being approved. So we see that perhaps the global order of e-commerce is being polarized in different national and regional regulations. So will global rules be still relevant in the future, or we will see sort of a pluralization of different regulations when it comes to e-commerce, and how this will affect the global economy? And globalization has always been supported by rules that applied globally, and the WTO is a symbol of that. But at the same time, this movement of approving rules which are regional or national and sometimes not compatible with each other may affect how the digital economy and the economy as a whole will work in the future. And at the background of all that, we have the disputes between the US and China on the trade field that goes beyond e-commerce, but that also creates a mood of unilateralism and of undermining cooperation on the global field. So we will have a difficult year, a year in which I believe countries will need to make sure that they engage constructively in talks on e-commerce to make sure that this part of the digital economy, which has been fundamental to the growth of many of them, is not undermined by a lack of adequate rules or lack of cooperation. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Marilia. Thank you for taking us through both the predictions. They both relate to e-commerce, but in different ways. There are a few questions for you, Marilia, I would say, related to e-commerce, to the USMCA, but I suggest we go through the next two predictions with Arvin, and then we'll go back to the questions for Marilia, and then we conclude with the 10th with Katerina. So Arvin, over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and hi to all. Really nice to see you in 2019 also. As Steph mentioned, in our prediction document, we will have a part about a few emerging technologies, which will be a cornerstone of Internet developments 2019. But for this briefing, we will shortly just pick two of them as the most prominent one. The rest you will find in our document. The first one we will like to tackle is, of course, 5G, new wireless network technology, which will deliver high speeds of internet on the mobile devices. So 5G is already in every newsletter and every news outlet out there, and companies are actually racing to get in that field. But in our prediction, and in predictions of many, 2019 will just start the beginning of the 5G development. Apart from that, the number of instruments or devices which are already 5G set for 5G wireless mobile are still not so high, and by any prediction it will actually go as a wildfire, to say, in 2020 and beyond. From one Gartner prediction, there are 23 billion devices right now connected to the internet in this IoT environment, and this report is predicting almost 10 billion more devices in the next 2 years, which is, of course, one of the major issues for security and other implications throughout the internet governance field. But 5G will be a generator for the technologies behind IoT and behind other fastly connected devices on the internet. The second one related to the IE and our previous discussion on machine learning and everything else is a quantum computing developments, which were so prominent in 2018, and 2018 marked the actual first implementation of the quantum computer in the wild, let's say, and it's implemented on a cloud, of course, giving an immense power to data-driven IE to be connected and just pull out the greatest, much more, way better outcomes for the data harvesting and also data collecting. Important from the quantum computing point of view is that IEEE is already working on standards for that, and 2019 will mark the year of standards for quantum computing also. The first standard developed is on nomenclature and definition, of course, of a quantum computer, just to everyone on the internet to be on the same side, to know how to classify and and actually make a nomenclature of quantum computing achievements and devices. And the second standard, which is implemented now, is it will address the performance measurements, metrics, performance benchmarks, to kind of enable the measurement of performance comparing to the previous computers we already have. So in that sense, also quantum computing will be developed still in laboratories, but 2019 will bring us the first quantum computers in wild, and most probably on clouds, to harvest other data. As I mentioned in our document, we did tackle a bit more on VR and even bioenhancement and bioethics in our document on predictions, but here I would just like to stop for these two, 5G and quantum. And to kind of step into something that we heard last year was a new technology on which internet will be built on, and this is this notion of decentralized data ledgers, popularly called blockchains. and the currencies, digital currencies devised on them as cryptocurrencies. As the title says, it's going to be a year of reckoning for blockchains and cryptocurrencies. And in 2018, in the beginning of 2019, the main issue for the regulators is actually to properly classify all those new digital assets and put them under the security laws and under other financial regulation already existing in the countries on financial markets. So the first prediction is that I'm just looking at some of your questions. Yes, I will answer that a bit later. The first thing was to actually recognize that blockchain it's not equal cryptocurrencies, and regulators are now doing an informative decisions on how this investment scheme through ICOs and other vessels are properly covered on the side of consumer protection or against financial frauds and all of that. Many European countries and many worldwide countries issued guidelines how to actually regulate ICO tokens or digital tokens or any kind of digital currency now transmitted over a distributed ledger technology on the internet. So European, for example, of course we all know Switzerland is in the forefront of this, and they had the guidelines even in 2019. But the EU as a whole is now stepping up. European Securities and Market Authorities, ESMA, are also issued the guidelines on how to manage crypto assets as a new way of financial assets, as a new form of financial assets. So regulators are kind of clearing the picture around initial coin offerings and all of these tokens issued on a distributed ledger technology, which was promised to be groundbreaking. What actually happened? Well, as someone who is in the history of internet would know, that decentralized systems are actually are successful if they are implemented across the network. So in 2018, all of these great ideas of decentralized apps actually lack participants, lack the people who are actually using it. And just to mark that, we had an avalanche of blockchain solutions for social development and in that area in 2019. But just to share with you one research conducted in October by the USA, the Agency of International Development, who looked at the 43 blockchain solutions implemented in the international development sector. And they study all of them, and they find out after a few months of study that the success rate stood at 0%. So basically we still did not have a deployable and let's say working blockchain solution on which is tested and helping us right now in this moment. There are many promises, but we're still not clear where this is gonna end up. Regarding the cryptocurrency as a mean of payment of the internet, of course the volume of cryptocurrencies used on dark markets are decreasing, and one of the reasons for that is the policymakers voted last year, and still in this year, even 2019 started like that, voted for for the implementation of anti-money laundering laws and regulation for the online exchanges, also as know your customer procedures for the all online exchanges, which brings to the less anonymity in cryptocurrency and actually brings us to a playfield on which is much more easier to control who is actually dealing with this kind of currencies. Please, if there is any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Arvin. Indeed, the research that you have just mentioned from the USA, the researchers is not promising. Let's see. There have been questions here which we've been answering via text. So I don't know if there are new ones, but Marilia and Vlada, would you like to add anything to what you replied, or shall we move to prediction 10?
Well, I think that Richard is correct. There has been a lot of influence from tech companies on the norms that are being discussed. They are part of some of the negotiation processes, but I don't think that this is new. You know, these tech companies, they have paid lobbyists in Brussels, in Geneva, and they are paid to do so, to talk to countries and to make sure that the norms that are being discussed do not disrupt their business models. Of course, on the other hand, there has been a very good statement produced by civil society, and Richard has provided a link, and I encourage everyone to take a look, because I think that the issues that they put on this statement, they are very much true. There has been several reports produced by UN organizations that perhaps don't have as much visibility and influence as the WTO, that have called attention to the fact that we currently have a digital divide, and that if we do not address this divide before we talk about liberalization, we may actually make the situation worse. And currently in the proposals that are on the table, it's pretty much a proposal that will make sure that those that are already having benefits from e-commerce will have more benefits, which is fair enough. But the proposals also need to make sure that those that are lagging behind are able to achieve the digital industrialization, and that they can catch up on the digital economy. And this is what the statement puts on the table. And this depicts one of the biggest divisions that we have in the WTO right now between developed countries, developing countries that did not achieve that stage of digital inclusion yet. And this is why the discussions are so hard to move forward in that scenario, and why sometimes they move forward in different settings, national, regional, which are sometimes easier to approve regulation than the global scenario. But that was a very good observation. On your question, Richard, on the agreement between the US, Mexico and Canada, to my knowledge, it has not been approved by the US Congress, and there has been a lot of political movements and games that have been played with President Trump. We don't have time to explore all of that, but of course, they want to approve the agreement because something needs to substitute NAFTA, but it's been held hostage a little bit with a political game and everything that has been going on in the US. So it's not approved yet, but it has been signed and agreed by the three countries. So it's definitely a move forward, considering that it has been discussed for such a long time, and countries such as Canada have been a little bit reluctant to move forward, and the three countries are on board. So it's definitely a step forward that happened in 2018. So let's see how long it will take for the three parliaments to approve nationally the agreement. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Marilia. Thank you for that. And I think I saw a couple of reports on the agreement. President Trump is expected to mention it in the State of the Union address. It's been delayed. I think it was supposed to be today, but it's been delayed by a few days. So we'll obviously follow that. I would say we'll move to the last prediction. So, Kath, over to you.
Thank you, Steph. So one of the predictions for 2019 is also that digital identities will become a lot more important, and this kind of the gap between online and offline will narrow even further. And I think one of the key questions there is again related to data, and in this case in particular data protection. So let me, in the interest of time, let me just give three brief examples of what we're talking about when we're talking about digital identities. So in one case, we're talking about digital platforms that give people a way to be recognized legally, for example, to do business in cases where they would normally not be able to do that. So what we have in mind here is, for example, M-Pesa, where people get into a position where they can do business even without a legal street address, which they would need in the official banking system. The second thing that we have in mind when we talk about digital identities is, of course, public service provision. And here governments have created various systems of digital identities One of the examples we have debated quite a bit recently is the Indian example of the system called Aadhaar. And then third, we're also talking about social media platforms who act as a kind of identity broker, where their services help us create and maintain an online identity. And in this case, of course, the companies related to these platforms amass a vast amount of data, which gives them a deep understanding of our economic, political, and social activities of individuals as well as of groups. So when we keep these three examples in mind, one of the key questions that is going to become even more prominent in 2019 is how do we ensure that this data is not misused? One of the concerns is obviously the aggregation of lots of data in the same place, and in particular the combination of social and economic data with biometric data. Another concern is related to the fact that in some cases the opportunities for people to opt out are becoming fewer and fewer. So for example, in some cases, if you need access to governmental services, you need to be part of one of those digital identity systems. In terms of approaches, in the European Union, we've of course seen the GDPR as a very strong instrument, but there are quite a lot of differences between countries. In some cases, the concern is that if we have stricter data protection regulations, this might harm innovation, this might harm business opportunities. An interesting question is also we've seen civil society being very vocal about the concerns of governments accumulating lots of data in the same place about their citizens and the misuse of that. At the same time, when we look at the general opinion on data sharing of personal and sensitive data, there seems to, in the general population in some cases, there seems to be much less worry about this kind of accumulation of data and data protection. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this debate between companies, between governments, between civil society, and between the general population with regard to digital identities is going to play out over the next 12 months. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you for that. I would just add that the social credit system that China has at the moment is already attracted controversy, but we can expect it to attract even more in 2019. So this is in the context of digital identities. We're at the end of our predictions, and I think we have also answered all of the questions that have been posed here and the comments. So thank you a lot for that. We'll move to see what's in store next month. So I have a few main events there. There are more which you will find on our observatory. I would just mention the Human Rights Council 40th session. That's at the end of February. And the ITU's working group on the internet, and that's this week. So that's in February. And some updates from us, from the GIP, and from Diplo, before we move on to regional development. So this week we launched a new report. Katarina was the lead author. In fact, Katarina, I'll give you the floor to say a few words about it on AI and diplomacy. And we'll also have the newsletter out at the end of this week. Kat, would you like to tell us more about the report?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So this is it. This is the report. We launched it yesterday in Brussels, and it's the second report in a kind of series that we started last year. So last year we looked at big data and diplomacy and launched a report on this, and kind of as a natural progression, now we're looking at AI and diplomacy. Both of these have been done in cooperation with the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and they've been a really good partner, and also they really have seen the importance of looking at the topic of artificial intelligence, in particular in relation to diplomacy and foreign policy. So what we do in this report is we provide a very broad mapping, because we've seen some discussions on the impact of AI on foreign policy, on security, lethal autonomous weapons is an example, over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of publications of national AI strategies and discussions around that. But what we haven't done so far is to have a broad overview of how can we even think of artificial intelligence and diplomacy. So one of the things we do in the report, we provide a broad mapping looking at artificial intelligence as a topic for diplomats that they need to be aware of, how this impacts existing topics, how this brings new topics to the international agenda. Then second, we look at artificial intelligence as a tool for diplomacy. And this is really interesting, but also quite challenging to research. And here the question is, how does artificial intelligence impact the work, the way diplomats work? And we have a couple of interesting examples related to that, mainly in the sense of assisted intelligence, so basically tools that help diplomats to research faster, to prepare better for negotiations. We also have examples such as chatbots and their use in consular affairs. These are quite interesting, but it's still quite difficult to make any broad predictions on this. And then third, we look at artificial intelligence as something that changes the environment in which diplomacy is practiced. So security implications, this kind of arms race for artificial intelligence, economic implications. So in the report, we provide this broad mapping. We also zoom in on one topic in particular, which is human rights and artificial intelligence, because this really highlights how artificial intelligence is impacting topics that are already existing on the international agenda, but it also highlights the responsibility of states to become active in this area. So the report was launched yesterday. You can see the link on the screen there. I encourage you to have a look, and also I encourage you to give us feedback, questions, comments, ideas for further research. You can do that by emailing any of us, or very simply you can email ai@diplomacy.edu. And basically we're looking forward to take the conversation further from here, because as I said, the report is an inception report. It is meant to give a broad overview, ideas, food for thought, and I think now it's very important to go into detail in lots of these issues. And for that, we're looking forward to your comments and suggestions as well. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you, Kat. For the report, Marco has shared it also, so thank you both. And perhaps, Marco, you can type in the address which Katharina just mentioned, ai@diplomacy.edu, which is the address of Diplo's AI lab. Glenn, you asked about the document for the predictions. Yes, we'll have it both as a policy brief and as a blog post on the Diplo's website, and there is where we will welcome your comments and questions on the predictions. You have shared already comments and questions here, but please do continue the discussion with us. We'll be looking forward to continuing the debate on the predictions and on what to expect in 2019. And now I'll give the floor to Andriana, because we have the updates from the regional from different regions. So Adriana, you can take us through what the updates were in January from the different regions.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you to all the speakers for the roundup of developments and for the roundup of the predictions. We will start our regional update with an update from Hanan, who will be telling us about the MENA region, more specifically on 5G testing in Qatar and about Dubai and blockchain. Hanan, over to you.
Good afternoon, my name is Hanan Boujami and I'm bringing updates from the Middle East and North Africa for the month of January 2019. Ooredoo Group yesterday successfully made the first trial international 5G call in the region between Ooredoo Kuwait and Qatar, demonstrating the phenomenal capabilities of its 5G networks in both countries. Detailed 5G testing is now underway in both Qatar and Kuwait, and plenty of incredible possibilities of 5G have already been showcased by the operator, including a driverless aerial taxi, 5G broadband in a moving vehicle, and never before seen gaming quality. In another news, the Dubai Future Accelerators is calling all innovative startups with original and feasible use cases that can contribute to Dubai's goal to become the first blockchain-powered city by 2020. And finally, the Middle East Network Operators Group meeting and Peering Forum MINOC 2019 will be held in Beirut on the 3rd and the 4th of April 2019. It is one of the biggest gatherings of network operators, content providers, and data centers in the region. It will bring together experts from across the Middle East and all over the world. The event is open to the entire technical community, from internet service providers, mobile operators, and content cloud infrastructure service providers. The meeting also covers a large range of topics interesting to government representatives, academics, and key business decision makers. Thank you very much, and see you next month.
Thank you, Hanana. And now we will hear from Sita, who will tell us about Vietnam's cybersecurity law and WhatsApp limitation in Indonesia.
Hello from Jakarta and Happy New Year. I would like to update you 2 digital policies changes in Asia. The first is Vietnam's cybersecurity law that is enacted this month. The 7 chapters and 43 articles law aim to protect national security and ensure social order and safety on cyberspace, along with responsibility of agencies, organizations, and individuals. In practice, the law obliges internet companies to put their data locally and hand over the data to government without a warrant. The law also requires internet companies to remove information that deem against government. In his New Year's speech, Vietnamese Prime Minister said that mass communication efforts must be stepped up to create social consensus, and those abusing the freedom of information and free speech, causing harm to the interests of the states and citizens, would receive appropriate punishment. Human Rights Watch has called the authorities to revise the law and postpone the implementations. Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Law said this law is designed to further enable the Ministry of Public Security pervasive surveillance to spot critics and to deepen the Communist Party monopoly on power. The law comes into force a week after Vietnamese Association of Journalists announced a new code of conduct on the use of social media by its member, forbidding reporters to post news, pictures, and comments that run counter to the states. The second subject I would like to share is WhatsApp limits user forward message in Indonesia. Starts in January 21st, 2019, Indonesian citizens can only forward 5 messages in these applications. This was announced after a meeting between Ministry of Communication and Informatics and WhatsApp Vice President Public Policies and Communications. The main objective of this limitation is to curb spreading hoax and disinformation. Moreover, Indonesia will have its national election in April this year, yet therefore political contents is highly sensitive. This new policy starts in India, which goes to the polls in April and May, and is Facebook's biggest national market outside the United States. The company announced it's looking into doing the same in other Asian nations such as Australia, India, Philippines, and Thailand, and taking into account different threats and local news. Thank you. That's my update. See you next month.
Thank you, Sita. And now we will hear from Grace, who will tell us more about Kenya's Digital ID project. Grace, over to you.
Welcome to Updates from Africa, big developments with Kenya's Digital ID project, where new laws have just been enacted, and this will facilitate the collection of not only biometric data, but also digital DNA data and GPS coordinates. Concerns are being raised about the project, top among them that Kenya does not even have a data protection law, and also the restricted tendering nature of this project. And to neighboring Uganda, the back and forth between the government of Uganda and The largest mobile network operator, MTN, continues. Now, MTN has been operating on an interim license over the past few months because its license expired and they're awaiting approval of their license application. This month, 3 of its executives were deported from Uganda, but the CEO of the company met with the president of Uganda on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum, and the president of Uganda tweeted that he had advised MTN to list at the Uganda Stock Exchange so that Ugandans could also own a piece of the very successful company. And this month also marked 300 days since what is probably Africa's longest internet shutdown was ordered in Chad. So there hasn't been a full internet in Chad over the past 300 days, and activists and digital rights groups marked this day by calling on the government of Chad and the African Union to intervene and restore full internet in the country. Contrast this with Zimbabwe, where the internet had also been shut down following protests in the capital, and the High Court of Zimbabwe just ordered restoration of the internet in full following a suit that had been instituted by a local NGO called Media Institute for Southern Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. And now we will hear from Wanda Perez, who will tell us about broadband improvements and investment map in the Caribbean region. Wanda, over to you.
Hello everyone, this is Wanda Perez with Caribbean Updates. Thanks to the technical and financial assistance from the World Bank and the partnership with Digicel, Grenada, St. Lucia and St. Vincent started the development of a future-proof broadband infrastructure that will connect homes, schools, government offices and businesses to each other and the rest of the world by 2020. In July 2018, through the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program (CARCIP), with the Caribbean Telecommunications Union as coordinator, the 3 countries signed contracts with Digicel in order to build up government and educational networks and a new submarine cable. The resulting public-private partnership structure is a first for digital infrastructure in the region. It is also the first of this magnitude, requiring approximately $45 million from governments and private partners. This allows all 3 governments to obtain substantial economies of scale, allowing lower pricing and better quality of service than if they had purchased the networks separately. In 2017, Inter-American Development Bank (IDB) launched Investment Map, an information management tool that supports the improvement, transparency, and efficiency of Latin American and Caribbean public investments. By that time, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Paraguay were the first Latin American countries scheduled to launch Investment Map. Expansion was a key component of the action plan announced in 2017, and now new platforms are being developed in Argentina, the Bahamas, and Jamaica, while additional countries are being considered. This is possible thanks to a new phase of collaboration between the IDB and Microsoft. Investment Map includes information on the funding and progress of individual projects at the national, subnational, and local levels. In the next round, Investment Map will feature new artificial intelligence and data analytics capabilities to gather insights and improve decision-making among policymakers.
Thank you, Wanda. This concludes our regional updates this month. So I will give the floor back to Steph for any final comments and reminders. Back to you, Steph.
Thank you, Andriana, and thank you also to the curators for bringing us the updates from the region. in 2019, you can expect even more updates from more regions, and the videos and the summaries are all on the observatory. I think this brings us to the end of our briefing for today, for this month, the first one in 2019. I'd like to thank to my colleagues here for the expertise, and thank you all of you for being with us today. And last but not least, the newsletter, as Marco has just mentioned it here, we're in sync, Marco. Download the newsletter or access the newsletter at the end of this week. It will have analysis, and it will also have the barometer that if you follow us every month, you're used to seeing it online and in the newsletter. So with this, I thank you for joining, and see you next month. Bye, everyone.